Wait, hold on. Who the hell am I? It is what it is. I'm a little biased. He did a good job. Imino was a nobody. It was definitely the one that we were all into. Really, that's the best they could do. Every main cast member got into at least one accident, which also might explain some things. They're visibly getting gaunt. Accident number 1, accident number 2, 4, number 6. Can I say alleged or can I say accused? Accident number 7. What is even the story? In a nutshell, poor ordinary girl is bullied by rich, snooty high schoolers. Lead bully falls in love with her. She is interested in lead bully's best friend. Cue love triangle, high school drama, teenage angst, rich people problems, and second lead syndrome. You might be wondering, why now? In this year of our Lord 2026, are we talking about Boys Over Flowers, which is a drama from 2009, which does make it 17 years old now. And while it was hugely popular back in the day, it is no longer that day, and it has been a hot minute since it's been relevant. And you might be thinking, okay, why would I start this K-drama deep dive with this drama? Or, why would I start this K-drama deep dive at all? In which case, maybe I should introduce myself. My name is Sarah, and for about 11 years, I ran a K-drama website called Drama Beans. And after that, I moved on to Netflix, where I was promoting Korean dramas and Korean content to an international audience. That was a couple of years ago, and I found that I was really missing the kind of discourse and analysis that we had back at Drama Beans that I haven't had in a little bit. There's a lot going on in this world of K-drama, and it has changed and evolved in so many ways, and I just wanted to dive right back in and see what would come of it. So I'm trying this as an experiment to see if anybody wants to join me in talking about some dramas, old and new, where we are in this space and how we got here. So the reason that Boys Over Flowers was the first drama I thought of is because for the longest time, for I would say a good decade, it was the gateway K-drama. Not just, I think, successful by drama metrics, but also by cultural metrics, right? It traveled beyond its borders. It was really a cultural phenomenon. But really beyond that too, Boys Over Flowers is kind of the perfect representation of the industry and Hallyu at the time. Hallyu being the Korean wave or the proliferation of Korean content internationally. And through taking a look at what Boys Over Flowers was and what it did for the industry at the time, I think you can trace some key parts of Korean dramas as a genre, as an industry, and see how it played out in this one drama. So with that said, let's dive in. It was a drama that aired in January of 2009. And if you look at where we are in the K-drama sort of timeline, I'll say it's kind of like the second wave of K-dramas. The initial Hallyu, like Korean wave, really took off, I want to say, in the early 2000s. That was the initial expansion and popularity of shows like Winter Sonata, Autumn in My Heart, Daejanggeum, Jewel in the Palace, Full House, shows like that. That's when drama started to pick up more international audiences, really aided by a lot of the internet structures at the time, like fan boards, message boards. That was a lot more of these Korean dramas being exported to other countries and then being broadcast on their linear channels, like in Southeast Asia or in China or in other mostly Asian territories. And then they picked up an audience that way. Around 2006-7-ish is when the internet really helped boom. These dramas start to travel internationally, pick up audiences, pick up fans outside. And smack right dab in the middle of this is Boys Over Flowers. You had some other hits, Princess Hours, Coffee Prince. Boys Over Flowers was like really at this pivotal point where it was starting to get much more known outside of Korea. It also had the added interest of being based on a property, the original Japanese being Hana Yori Dango, which already had a huge fan base because there was the manga, then the Japanese live action film, and then there was the 2001 hugely popular Taiwanese drama Meteor Garden that catapulted their 4 male leads and then the 1 female lead into stardom and kind of kicked off like the whole idol drama trend even. And then after that, there was the 2005 Japanese live action series Hana Yori Dango, which honestly, chef's kiss, I think is kind of gold standard for manga adaptations. And that was also hugely popular internationally and picked up a following. So by the time we get to 2008, and the Korean Boys Over Flowers is announced, there's a lot of interest and maybe a little bit of skepticism because we had some good adaptations already and it hadn't been that long and was K-drama style going to help or ruin this really beloved property? I think it's kind of like Harry Potter now, where if you're a fan, you might be really excited for a new version. And then also, if you're a fan, maybe a different kind of fan, you might think, really, another one? Is this really necessary? So, a couple of things to note is the production house attached to this, Group 8, was already known for doing some good work, in particular, a smash hit in 2006 called Princess Hours. That was another adaptation of a popular manhwa series and had some of the same hallmarks. It had a young, up and coming cast that then blew up into superstardom, this very trendy, youthful vibe, and then was also hugely popular internationally. So they're hoping to capitalize on this. And the director was fairly well known. The most well known thing that he had done prior to that was 2006's My Girl, which was another trendy drama that did really well, was really fun, and was kind of a hit of the moment. An interesting thing about the casting, or maybe this isn't interesting so much as it is kind of obvious, is that it was hard to cast this thing. So they announced this in early 2008, and it wasn't for months that we heard about this. And there started to circulate certain concerns, rumors, that this production was on shaky ground because I think by mid-year, by summer, they still hadn't cast it. And by the time you were expecting to go into pre-production, because they were trying to get this on the air by the end of the year, they still hadn't found any of their leads. I remember there were more articles about how they were not finding their cast than there were articles about casting. But finally, towards the fall is when it started to all come together. I'm pretty sure the first one cast was Kim Hyun-jung, an idol who was known for his band Double S 501. He fit the bill in all respects. He plays the second lead character, Jihu, and I think was really cast for his looks. He looks like what everyone expected the character should look like. Pretty, sensitive, gentle, polished, all of those things. And the funny thing about Kim Hyun-jung's casting was, based on interviews later, it sounds like he maybe wasn't so into being in the drama or being in acting. But at the time, if you were an idol, then really the next big step for you to take was to go into acting. And there were a lot of idols transitioning into acting, some well and some maybe not so well. I think his management wanted him to do it, so he was cast. Then, of course, the biggest casting news, and also the one that had the most question marks, was the Lee Min-ho, Lee Min-ho main character role. Lee Min-ho, when he was cast, was a nobody. Nobody knew he was. He had only done a couple of really small things before then. One of his first dramas was like not even a primetime series. It was a EBS campus high school drama called Secret Campus. And fun fact, it also co-starred Park Bo-young, who would, of course, go on to become a huge, huge star herself. But nobody saw it. It wasn't prime time. It was maybe EBS. I believe the E stands for educational. So you can imagine it was a smaller, low-budget production. And then he had also had a side role in a drama called I Am Sam, or I Am Teacher. And that was starring Park Min-young in one of her first leading roles, and Top from Big Bang. You know, he's in it, but he was a side character, didn't really have much of a role, and nothing to write home about. So when he's cast, there's a lot of interest, but I remember also thinking he got cast as the lead in this huge production and we don't know about him. Maybe he's good. Maybe he auditioned and maybe he's good. The key things to know about his casting was, one, as an actor, he was really poor at the time. He describes being so poor that his family members had to live in separate households because they couldn't afford to live at the same household. When they were describing the audition process, he was said to have beat out 300 to 1 odds. So that was how many people were in contention and how many people he beat out. He explained afterward too that when he was auditioning for this, he was so determined to get the role because he was just desperate. He had to get it. He was just so committed to getting it that he went into the audition with that perm. I think it was perm number 5. He had permed his hair a bunch of times to get it just right. And he had gone in with the perm to have the look of the character because the curly hair is one of the hallmarks of this character. He also later, another fun story, he also later said that he tried to act a little bit method in his real life to get into the character, but he didn't tell his friends that he was doing a role. He would be ordering his friends around like, hey, get me that thing, or hey, move aside, and they'd be like, what's going on? I mean, he didn't tell them why, which you think he could have, but maybe that was the point, is to be so good at it that it just became a part of him. And then Kuozon was cast as the lead character, Chandi. She was kind of known at the time. I think it wasn't hugely controversial for her to be cast, but there were some thoughts that maybe she was a little bit too old to play this high schooler role. I think she was 25, and most of the guys were around 20 to 22. It wasn't a slam dunk, I don't think, but I think people were mostly just kind of willing to let it be. And then rounding out the F4, like the main four characters, you had Kim Bum and Kim Jun. So Kim Bum might have had the most acting experience aside from Kueson. Fun fact, he had just prior to Boys Over Flowers been doing this long-running big special production, I think 50-episode drama called East of Eden, which was dominating the ratings, and he played the early childhood version of the main character, and he was so good. He kind of really proved himself in that, having a lot of dramatic range. And apparently that role is actually what got him cast in this role. Ironically or not, Boys Over Flowers was airing in the rival time slot to East of Eden. So for much of their run, they were running against each other. Kim Jun was in a band called T-Max at the time, but T-Max wasn't really well known. I think it was more the case that him being in this drama made people interested in T-Max rather than having an existing fan base. And he was completely unknown, never acted before. And I don't think T-Max really went on to do much, which might be a shame because I think they had I like some of their songs. They had a fun pop rock sound, even if they are to blame for the infamous Almost Paradise that will make your ears bleed through this entire show. Okay, moving on through the rest of the cast, really, those are the big ones. But I will say, since Boys Over Flowers was such a hot property, every role kind of had a little bit of scrutiny. And there was interest in even like side characters or tertiary characters. So, for instance, the older sister, Lee Min-ho's older sister in the show, is played by Kim Hyun-ju, and she is a former sort of it girl, played the leads in all of the romantic dramas of the 90s and early 2000s. And Han Chae-young was also on the rise at the time, and she plays Ji-hoo's first love character. The mom, Lee Hae-young, was well known. Lee Si-young was interesting. I think this one might have been her debut or one of her very first roles. And she was so good. She was unknown, but she was so good that I think this was really what kind of gave her that footing to have the career that she has come to have now. And Kim So-eun playing Chandi's best friend. And then Lee Min-jung. Lee Min-jung comes in halfway through the drama to play like the rival love interest. And she wasn't super well known, and then she went on to have much more leading roles. And side note, is now married to Lee Byung-hun, who you might know as the frontman from Squid Game or the talking fire from K-pop Demon Hunters. Oh, an interesting side note, when I didn't realize this at the time, but when I was doing a little bit of digging for this, I came upon the casting note. There's a side character who comes in around episode 11-12 and played by Jung Lee-chul, and he's I want to say the twin brother who wants to get revenge. That's all you need to know. And that role was initially cast with Kim Soo-hyun, who of course now is a big star with a big asterisk next to his name right now. That's a topic for another day. But Kim Soo-hyun was apparently cast. And at the time, Kim Soo-hyun was also in the very nascent stages of his career. And I think maybe at the table read, it wasn't working or didn't fit the character. And so they replaced him with Jung Lee-chul. And I have to say, that was probably a good thing. You know, he's like a villain. And Kim Soo-hyun wasn't yet at that stage of his career. I will say, if we're looking at Boys Over Flowers through a modern lens, it is a little, maybe doesn't hold up. Maybe it doesn't perfectly age. And yes, it is campy and a little over the top, a lot over the top, dramatic, soapy. But I think it's worth noting too that we knew this at the time. We knew it was corny. We knew it was simplistic and a little bit juvenile, and we ate it up anyway. It was delicious and fun and addictive, and they knew how to hook you in and just kind of dial up the drama in a entertaining way that we didn't take too seriously. So with this as the backdrop, why did we care about Boys Over Flowers then? And why do we care about it now? It was hugely, immensely popular, but just as a caveat, it wasn't necessarily a top ratings getter. To go over ratings really quickly, there were at the time three main broadcasters that aired dramas on a regular schedule. There were, of course, like other channels, like cable channels and etc., but the main primetime premium exportable dramas that we all know about, they all aired either on NBC, KBS, or SBS, which are the three free over-the-air broadcasters. Most dramas were airing in that Monday, Tuesday slot, or Wednesday, Thursday slot, or Saturday, Sunday slot. So 2 episodes per week arranged in those groupings. Things have changed, and that is no longer the case, and there are different time slots, additional time slots, and more players. But that means that for every time slot, you had a three-way competition, and that was pretty important. We're really caring more about the ratings share, like the percentage of people watching, than we are about finite actual numbers of people watching. Boys Over Flowers was a Monday, Tuesday drama airing on KBS, which means NBC had a competitor and SBS had a competitor. And like we said, East of Eden was the competitor for a lot of its run. East of Eden had been running for a couple of months already. And so Boys Over Flowers comes in when this juggernaut is already number one. And it came in at a pretty solid high teens rating, which at the time was pretty good. East of Eden was pulling in like 30%. So East of Eden was killing it. Boys Over Flowers comes in and puts in a very strong showing in second place. But a thing to note is people were watching it. Even if they weren't contributing to that ratings number, Boys Over Flowers was instantly popular. I think it aired on a Monday. Yes, it was a Monday, Tuesday show. So it airs on a Monday. And by Wednesday, everybody's talking about this drama and Lee Min-ho in particular. So it did have a cultural imprint immediately that you might not really get if you're just looking at the numbers. And I think at one point it finally did surpass, but but they were very neck and neck. And Boys Over Flowers had rerun ratings that were higher than some first run programming from other competitors. So it's doing really well. I think more importantly than the numbers is really the kind of cultural phenomenon that it was immediately. So of course, like I said, Lee Min-ho was the main draw. I don't mean to diminish the contributions of any of the other cast members. There were people who loved the second lead. There were people who were all in it for Chandi. But Lee Min-ho really, I think, was the big surprise and also got lion's share of the media and the popularity. And it felt like we were discovering something special in real time. The drama airs on a Monday, and 5 days later, he's inundated in CF offers, endorsement deals, contracts, like just the hottest property. He was so popular that the secret campus drama that I mentioned that he was in, they actually like dug that out of the archives and re-aired it on TV. They immediately were like, we got to put out special music videos. We have to put on special events, fan signings, anything you could do to strike while the iron is hot. Also, it's an immensely memeable and like spoofable show. And so they were, even at the time, like tons of comedians and doing parodies and skits. That hair, I want to tell you, like it was so popular that the 구준표 perm became legitimately a hairstyle. I'm not talking a parody hairstyle, like where they're just like doing it for fun. Men took in photos of this character to salons and asked for a perm exactly like this. And I mean, perhaps it's been purged from the internet since, but I bet you could see some evidence of that hairstyle if you look deep enough. Also interesting that it was so popular, like I was saying, in that Monday, Tuesday time slot that it literally saved the dying time slot. So KBS had for, I want to say 2 years, been languishing in the Monday, Tuesday slot. They were just dying. They had a run of about 18 dramas. I think the exception, there were maybe 4 out of the 18 that were doing okay, but 14 of them were either flops or big disappointments. So there was real talk of just getting rid of that time slot entirely. Well, Boys Over Flowers airs in January of 2009 and saves this time slot so that when asking KBS executives afterward what they were going to do about this time slot and if it was really going away, they were kind of like, what are you talking about? We were never going to do it with this time slot. You're making I don't know what you're talking about. So they just kind of retroactively decided it had never happened. The accidents. All right, so we have to talk about the accidents. And this was maybe one of the most accident prone production that I have heard about either in a long time or maybe ever. Every main cast member got into at least one accident, some twice. I'm going to put a little asterisk by Imino's name. So, to go in chronological order, if you'll recall, the drama premiered on January 5th, Monday, and aired through the end of March. So it ran for about 3 months, 25 episodes, 2 episodes a week. On January 21st, you have accident number 1. This is Kim Yeon-jung. It was in the afternoon. He was on his way to filming. A car in the next lane, I think, was trying to go into his lane and hit the side of their van. It was a pretty light accident. That was that. The very next day, January 22nd, is accident number 2. This one was Kim Jun and was also a pretty light one. This was maybe the lightest out of all of them, where his car had a fender bender with a taxi at an intersection. No injuries. They were able to take care of things on the spot and didn't really worry about it. A couple of days later, you have January 26th, and this one is Imino's manager. So the manager had dropped Imino off at home following shooting that night and then was on his own way home when he was hit by a car. Although Imino wasn't in the car at the time, the car was hit in the passenger's side door. And so, of course, it gave rise to some Imino fans thinking, oh my God, he could have been hit. It could have been him. Then a couple of days later, on January 28th, this is accident number 4. And this one is Kueson, not a car accident. She was filming a swimming pool scene. If you remember, her character is a swimmer. And I think she was diving and she hit her head on the bottom of the pool and she got a concussion. And this one is one where I think it wasn't maybe treated as seriously at the time, but it went on for days and she had nausea and vomiting for multiple days and had to rest a little bit. But of course, the pace of the drama meant that she couldn't rest too much. Just a few days after that, on February 1st, is Kim Bum's first accident, overall accident number 5. And this one was not a big deal. He was on his way to location to film, and I think they were at a toll booth and the car behind him hit his car. 1 week later, though, is the bigger accident. The accident happened at 7 a.m. On their way home after filming all night. And the manager, he was driving the van and hit the guardrail and went off into the embankment. So I think the implication might not have been said is that the manager was super tired and lost control of the car and it went off. Kim Bum was okay, but I had to have stitches in his right foot because there was a laceration. So I think this is maybe the biggest of them all. But if you're keeping track, and I'm keeping track, these are way too close for comfort. We've only been on the air for 1 month and already we're on accident 5. Then towards the end of February, on February 27th, we have accident number 7. And this one is Kueson again. And this one I think is maybe the most, or this one had the most consequences because their van was traveling back to Seoul. So the school scenes were shot in a different city. And so they finished shooting and were heading back to Seoul. And when they were changing lanes, I think they either hit the car next to them or the car next to them hit them. In any case, there was a collision and Kueson was sitting and she hit her face on the passenger seat in front of her and lacerated her mouth. Or it was the inside of her lip, and it was bad enough that she needed stitches on the inside of her mouth and her face had some swelling, so she couldn't immediately film. But at the time, this was February 27th, the drama was in the thick of the production schedule, and they had not finished filming the episodes that were airing the next week. So they were filming episodes 17 and 18. Episode 17 was set to air on March 2nd. So that's just a couple of days. And so they had to scramble and figure out what to do because Kueson, because she had stitches in her mouth, she couldn't speak. And if you watch episode 17 with this knowledge in your head, you might think, now I finally understand. So what happens is because they hadn't finished filming episode 17, they had to figure out how to film it. They couldn't afford to have a rest. So they decided to rewrite that episode so that she didn't need to speak. So if you have this in your mind when you're watching this very awkward scene, if you'll recall, this is the episode where it's Lee Min-ho and the other love interest, Lee Min-jung, and Kim Hyun-jung, and Koo Hae-sun. So the four of them are in a cafe, and all of a sudden, Lee Min-jung is just eating a lot of ramen. And you're wondering, oh, okay, this is really weird. And Koo Hae-sun can't speak. So she's just kind of miming and facially reacting to things, which if you're watching without this knowledge, you're like, what's wrong with her? But originally, it was supposed to be like a ramyeon eating contest where they both are eating, but because she couldn't, Lee Min-jung just eats it all herself. It's an odd scene, and I think they just didn't have time to rewrite it in a way that made better sense. They also weren't able to finish filming the next episode. So what happened was, this is when they decided to hastily throw together a special. So instead of episode 17 and 18 airing that week, they aired a special episode and then 17 and then pushed 18 to the next week, which is why the drama got off schedule, which is why it ends with episode 25 instead of 24. So if you watch this special, which I don't know if it's available anywhere, you're not missing much. It's just a bunch of interviews with the four F4 boys who are just so green and very adorably awkward, because if you recall, like, they have been shooting this drama this whole time, so they haven't had a lot of time to do media outside of shooting, and so it's sort of like this overnight stardom, and they're not used to it, and so they're just very cute and awkward and just telling stories behind the scenes of what it's like to film things. And I think somebody plays the piano, somebody might sing a song. It is what it is. Okay, so the reason we're talking about these accidents, aside from the fact that it's interesting bit of trivia from back in the day, is it really points to what the K-drama system was about at the time, which is the live shoot. And by live shoot, I don't mean you're literally airing live. It just means you're filming so close to the air date that it essentially feels like it's live production, like on the spot production. So as you might have guessed from the timeline we're talking about, the drama is often shooting and then airing a few days later, which is a wild, wild way to do anything. And when I talk to people who aren't maybe familiar with the K-drama system, the question a lot of people sort of like are dancing around is, does Korea just like not know how to manage their time? Are they just really bad at planning and scheduling? And the answer is, well, maybe, but the answer for why they live shoot is not that. It's not about being poor planners. It is actually the desired result. To be clear, things have changed since then, and the production has gone through a lot of evolution and is no longer only in a live shoot model. There are other models now. But at the time, this was really the primary way that Korean dramas were filming. And again, it wasn't because they didn't know how to do better. It was because they so valued the live feedback from the audience that once you lose that, if you were to pre-produce a whole drama, like all 16 or 24 episodes of something, and air it and they didn't like it, you weren't really given any opportunity to fix anything that they weren't responding to or lean into things that they were. They, to some extent, want to be able to respond to things that work. It doesn't mean that they're going to rewrite the entire show. I don't think that's really the intent. It's so that they can kind of like tweak and match the audience taste. And if somebody's really popping, give them more lines. If somebody is really tanking, then diminish their role. And you'll see this a lot where something might start off one way, but it kind of heads off in a different direction. If you look at it kind of holistically, it might not feel like it ended up where it intended to, but at the moment, they were doing what was working, what was getting audiences to respond and to watch and to sell ad dollars against. So this is very much considered a feature, not a bug. And it's a feature that comes with a lot of trade-offs. They had been, for many years at least, been willing to make that trade-off because in their mind, in their accounting, it was a better deal to be able to potentially wring a little bit of a better result out of what they were working on than to just kind of commit to something and perhaps throw away the whole thing. And you're not starting filming like the week before. Often you're going to start production a couple of months in advance, and get a few episodes in the can before you start the broadcast. And once the broadcast hits, then you're committed. Then you gotta go. The clock stops for no one, and you're making those episodes no matter what. There are some hilarious and wild stories out there of other drama productions that went to extremes. I've heard stories of people, editing an hour before air. There are certain cases too where the dramas have a time slot. It's like 9:40 or 10 p.m. or whatever the time slot is for starting the hour. And there have been cases where dramas start like 10 minutes late. That's because they were editing and finishing the actual tape before delivering it to the studio. It's crazy. As a result, that means that people aren't getting any sleep. And none of these boys were getting any sleep. They were getting maybe a couple of hours. I think Imino said that they were all getting maybe 2 to 3 hours on a good night, and on a bad night, not at all. Like you're just kind of like working through the night. As a result, everybody on the cast and the crew lost at least 5 kilograms of weight, which you can see if you watch the episodes in order. They are visibly getting gaunt. Sometimes you actually do see like dark circles under the eyes that they're trying to cover up with makeup, and they're just tired. It is part of the beast, and granted, not all dramas are that to the wire. Some do have slightly better time management, but this one was particularly to the wire. And they have this thing called, I want to say, 쪽대본. It means like when the script comes out not as a full script, but in pages. And that's because they're also writing in real time. Rather than waiting for the scriptwriter to finish a full episode, they are getting pages, shooting them, committing them to film, and then shooting more pages, which again maybe explains a few things about continuity or character sort of changing their minds throughout a show. If you just said one thing, but then the scene after contradicted it, that's why. It also means that you can't shoot retakes of a lot of scenes. And so barring like actual mistakes in a take, they're getting that first take, maybe the second take. They don't have the luxury of doing more takes until they get it to the artistic intent that they want, which also might explain some things. If you're watching some dramas and you're like, really, that's the best they could do? Probably not. It's just that they couldn't afford to spend the time to get more footage. And Imino actually said too that when he was filming, a lot of times after the scene wrapped, he would go off in a corner and cry because he was so frustrated that he knew he could do better, but he wasn't given the opportunity to do that. So it just made him feel really frustrated. It's funny too, though, because I think he was one of the better actors of the cast. He was definitely the one that we were the most invested in as an actor, maybe more than a character, but he made that character work because that character is a problematic character, and he turned him into somebody who actually had motivations and depth and turned him around as well. So good job, Imino. I mean, I'm a little biased, but he did a good job. Also, side story, once the drama started to pick up and get a lot of fans, whenever there was an outdoor scene, like at the school that they were shooting at, which was like a real school, fans would just show up. So you can't get on set, but you could definitely get there and close to them and see the shoots fairly closely. And I think they were impeding the production so much that sometimes the crew would wrap filming, pack up all their stuff and leave to fool the fans into thinking that they were done. And then they would come back and shoot in secret overnight when nobody was there, which also led to production delays. So now, to be a little bit more serious, I think we have to address one more story in relation to this drama because it has a significant role in the history of this drama, and that is Jang Ja-yeon. I'm cutting in here to add a few details that I missed the first time I recorded this. So Jang Ja-yeon, she played one of the three mean girls who used to pick on Tendi. The character's name was Sunny. And she was a pretty rookie actress. She had only debuted a couple of years before, hadn't really done anything big. And on March 7, 2009, she died. She had taken her own life. That in itself was a big shock to the production, of course, but also just society at large. There had been a number of celebrity passings that had made the news, and there was a sense at the time that Once one high profile celebrity had taken their life, there were others that followed. And that isn't to say that it caused that, but I think there is an effect that happens when there's a lot of attention given to this kind of death. And it could trigger some others, or it could also just amplify. This came at a time when really the media was not being maybe the most responsible. There wasn't that understanding of how to report on this sensitively. There were quite a lot of details given. In any case, the main thing that came out of this was the Chang Jae-yeon list. So when she first passed, it was assumed to be a result of her suffering from depression, which she did have. But soon afterward, it became known that she had left behind this list, and it became known as the Chang Jae-yeon list. It was over 7 pages long, and she named a bunch of names. So in this list, she alleges that her agency president had forced her to essentially play escort to these high-profile businessmen, media executives, and just general powerful men in society. It was a little bit of this dirty backroom secret that giving sexual favors or even sleeping with them would advance their careers, or it would be necessary for them if they wanted to continue to work with their agency. So really the villain in all of this is the agency president who was setting up these meetings. But of course, her list named dozens of men that she had had to either go out with or service or have sex with, all in the name of her career. When she would try to resist, her agency president would beat her and yell at her and generally just abuse her. So in the wake of this list going public, there was an investigation and prosecutors looked into it, but there are reports of this being a corrupt investigation, that certain powerful men that she had named had interfered with the police investigation and impeded justice. The only people to be actually punished for this were the agency president and her manager, but they received suspended sentences. So ultimately, it was a pretty light sentence. None of the other men were indicted. It was reportedly because of a lack of evidence that these were the men involved. Again, this is early March that this had happened, and there was still a month left of this drama. There were reports too that the drama, which was at the very height of its popularity, had all of these events planned, these public events and fan events. Reportedly, the cast felt that this was inappropriate and it wasn't right to do. And so they really pushed back hard on this and were able to get these events scaled back. So in the end, it's a sad story. I don't think we got to see the justice meted out that we would have liked to have seen. And it also points at a shadier side of the industry that might have been sort of whispered about, but what Chang Jae-yeon's list did was to put it in the open and make it a part of the public consciousness in a way that it really hadn't been done before. And I think if we were to take some kind of silver lining out of it, it is that she made it very hard for people to ignore that this was happening. And although she personally did not get justice, it was something that became so known that we couldn't deny that it was at least happening, and maybe had a hand in making it harder for continued abuses in the future. I know that's kind of a hard pivot out of this topic, but thought it was worth including. So, what is Boys Over Flowers' legacy, and why do we care about this drama now? I think one thing is the Flower Boys as a phenomenon. It's right there in the name. Now, Boys Over Flowers was definitely not the first drama to have this concept of the flower boy. They existed in pop culture before. I think K-pop, the aesthetic was there already, but it took it from being one aesthetic into being maybe a main aesthetic for this masculine beauty ideal or standard. So I know that now we're very accustomed to seeing very good looking, pretty men in K-pop or in K-dramas or just in life. I think that as a beauty aesthetic is pretty common, but back in the day, it was maybe a minority aesthetic. Maybe it was just one niche of beauty. And I think this drama really brought it to the fore. Also in conjunction with the K-pop rise at the time. K-pop was in its also earlier phases. We're probably in like the second wave of K-pop too, if we think about it. 2009 is what? It's probably Super Junior, maybe early SHINee, 2 p.m., 2 a.m. I think making this alternate idea of beauty into a very mainstream idea of beauty was one thing that it really ushered forward. And it would stick around for many, many years to come, as we know now. So I'm trying not to use the word feminine because it's not femininity, it's an alternate look at masculinity. It's really presenting this as a very valid form of masculinity, of masculine beauty. They are seen as very valid leading men, and they have these characteristics that are maybe not macho. They're not in that very rugged sort of way. It's like saying this version of our hero, he is very good looking, he cares about his clothes, he is coiffed, he takes care of his appearance, he is in touch with his emotions and he might even cry when he's sad. This is a valid version of a masculine hero, of a masculine ideal. And I think that's kind of lovely. Tebars and candies, I think, is another thing as character archetypes. These are, again, not things that this drama invented by any means, but I think it really solidified them. What we see in Boys Over Flowers, though, is I think the pairing of them and the way that they play off each other almost became a standard. They put it together in such a tropey way, and it created such story magic, such chemistry that we will forever see these paired together. So I think in earlier drama history, we saw a lot of Cinderellas, like straight up Cinderellas. And these are the ones who did need to be rescued. They might not say they wanted it, but they were ultimately rescued by the Prince Charming, who was often rich or very well off, would come in and solve her problems. And you had some examples of this in dramas like Star in My Heart, Lovers in Paris. Even Princess Hours was a little like this, but Candy became almost like the new archetype of Cinderella, maybe like Cinderella's older sister, where yes, she was also poor, and yes, she probably was going to end up with a rich man, but the key difference was that her character was resilient and strong, and she was going to fight her way up there, and she was going to rescue herself. The nice pretty rich guy, he was going to be there, but he wasn't going to be the answer to her problems. Aside from this, you see this a lot in dramas like Secret Garden or Heirs or Fated to Love You. And the pairing with the Chaebol, like I said, is Chaebol, meaning, like, if you don't know, is the Korean version of like that conglomerate family that rules really a lot more like a royal family than a business proposition where roles are inherited and businesses are inherited. They're the new Prince Charming, right? In an absence of a true royalty, you're going to go with this sort of alternate royalty. And we have a bunch of these characters in every drama ever. Some examples being like Shopping King Louis or Business Proposal or King the Land. Queen of Tears even is like the reverse setup where it's the woman who is the Tebar and then the guy is like the poor, plucky, down on his luck but fighter type character. Another thing that Boys Over Flowers did, which is kind of interesting now, is glamorizing the lifestyles of the rich and famous. I think it's interesting because things have definitely taken a turn. This is a little bit out of vogue now, where I think around the mid 2010s or so, we saw that real shift in real life as well as in dramas, where you're looking at rich people going from the aspirational heroes to the villains. I think one of the earliest characters that I really remember is 2015's Veteran with Yoo Ah-in playing this really, basically he's a rich bastard and he uses his position to abuse power and get away with bad behavior. It coincides with the sentiment in the greater world. The Occupy movement was coming up at the time, that sentiment of eat the rich that really showed up in the storytelling as well, where it's not that all rich people are bad, but when you had a villain, it was most likely that they were going to be the rich person. You have things like the whole Penthouse franchise or The Glory or Vincenzo or Reborn Rich or even Parasite, where you have the rich people and their lack of understanding or them being out of touch with the lives of the real ordinary folks is what gives them their lack of humanity. That makes it, hard to connect with or easy to hate. You are going to have cases, of course, where these rich Chaebol characters are not the villains. But I think in those cases too, there's a mitigating circumstance. So even in Crash Landing on You or Queen of Tears, where they are both from this very rich Chaebol family, you see that The natural state of the family is to be a pit of vipers. And through circumstances, our main characters are able to be good people despite that, and not good because of that. Whereas I think in the Boys Over Flowers era, it was a lot more like, look at how rich they are. Don't you want to be so rich? Oh my God, so rich. And so they had entire episodes where they were basically just like showing off their rich people things. Like one episode, they're on a yacht. Another episode, they're racing cars, which like, I don't even know if they were old enough in the drama to be driving cars. I think they were horseback riding, they were shooting, hunting. It was like vicarious living through the rich. At the time, it was super fun. I think we're definitely in the next iteration of this story, which is, in my opinion, a lot more fun and interesting to explore. But this is, a slice of history, a slice of a different era. And really looking at Boys Over Flowers as this time capsule of what live shoot production used to be and all of the things that were wrong with it. There's so much more to talk about with the live shoot that, I don't know, maybe I'll do a different exploration of that with lots of other examples. But in the case of Boys Over Flowers, it was just a peek behind the curtain of how things can go wrong under this pressure cooker where you're just trying to churn out something. Like, it's so popular that you want to chase the heat. You want to make sure that you're wringing every single dollar that you can out of this cash cow. And the cost of that, which is people's healths and accidents and production snafus left and right. What's interesting is that I wonder if they would look back and say that it was worth all of that because they were able to capitalize on the heat at the time. But I think you will see in other cases where the cost is definitely high and maybe in certain cases too much. But that's a topic for another day. And I think we can wrap it up here for Boys Over Flowers. Thank you for sticking around if you've made it this far. There's just so much to talk about with this show. And it's been a fun trip down memory lane. Let me know if there are other dramas that you would like to talk about as I explore this whole K-drama deep dive format. And I hope to see you next time. Bye. Well, I am... Okay, let's try this again. And... I'm just gonna keep trying this again and again. What is it when that there? I don't really know if I like any of these.